Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into really a cornerstone of Methodist faith. It's one of John Wesley's standard sermons called The Great Privilege of Those That Are Born of God.
A really foundational one.
Absolutely. And these sermons, the original 44, Wesley picked them himself. They're meant to be key for understanding, evangelical faith as Methodists see it.
They really shaped the core doctrines.
So our mission today is to unpack this one. We want to get into what Wesley meant by being born of God.
Right.
And especially tackle that line from 1 John 3.9 that can sound pretty striking. Whosoever is born of God doth not commit sin.
It definitely raises questions.
Yeah. So let's get into this central piece of Methodist teaching.
Sounds good. In this sermon, it's just so vital for Methodists, I think, to grasp the transformation God offers. It's more than just forgiveness. It's this deep internal renewal.
Okay, so where does Wesley start with that?
Well, a key starting point, maybe the key point, is his distinction between justification and the new birth.
Right, justification and new birth. We hear those terms a lot,
Yeah.
but sometimes almost interchangeably.
Sometimes, yeah. But for Wesley, they're different, even though, and this is crucial, they happen at the exact same moment for a believer.
Okay, so happening together but not the same thing.
Yeah.
How did he explain the difference?
He saw justification as God doing something for us. It's God's act declaring us righteous. Our legal status changes, from enemy to child.
Right, like being pardoned.
Exactly. That's justification. But the new birth, that's God doing a work in us, changing our actual inner self, our soul, from a state of sin to holiness.
So for us versus in us.
Precisely. He used analogies. Justification restores God's favor. The new birth restores God's image in us.
Ah, okay.
Or justification takes away the guilt of sin.
And the new birth takes away the power of sin.
You got it. Justification is the courtroom acquittal, you could say. The new birth is the actual transformation of our character, both gifts given together at the moment of faith.
That distinction really helps. It clarifies things quite a bit.
It really does. And understanding it is sort of the key that unlocks the rest of the sermon for Methodists. It sets up how Wesley understands being born of God, and then that statement about not committing sin. It's all tied together.
Okay, good. So with that framework justification for us, new birth in us, let's dive deeper into what Wesley means by born of God. It's clearly more than just, say, being baptized or identifying as Christian.
Oh, much more. For Wesley, it's not about an outward label or even a ritual act alone. It's a profound, deep, inward change, something the Holy Spirit does.
He talks about it like a whole new way of existing.
Yeah, almost like entering another world, he suggests. A fundamental shift in how you experience reality.
He uses that analogy, comparing it to natural birth.
Yeah.
That seems pretty central to his explanation.
It is. It's quite a powerful comparison. He points out that an unborn child, well, it exists, it's sustained, but it doesn't really sense the outside world, does it? Its senses are closed off, limited interaction, limited awareness.
Right. It's alive, but not really engaged with the world yet.
Exactly. And spiritually, Wesley argues it's similar before the new birth. A person might, subsist by God's general grace, but they aren't truly sensible of God. They don't feel his presence in the same way.
Their spiritual senses are dormant.
That's the idea. They're unaware of spiritual realities, of God's immediate nearness.
It's like knowing about God, maybe, but not really knowing God.
Kind of, yes. But then, like a baby at natural birth suddenly experiences light, sound, touch.
Yeah.
The soul born of God awakens spiritually. The Spirit is breathed into the soul, Wesley says, and the soul breathes back through love, prayer, praise.
So it's interactive.
Very much so.
Yeah.
The eyes of the understanding open up. You start to perceive God's love, God's power more directly. The ears open to hear his voice, to follow his guidance.
The veil is removed, as he puts it.
Yes, that's his language. It allows for this direct experiential knowledge and love of God to flood in.
Okay, so it's this radical awakening, a new kind of spiritual perception.
A whole new level of awareness of God's presence, like realizing, thou art about my bed and about my path. That becomes a felt reality.
Which leads us to the really, the potentially difficult part for a lot of us. That statement, whosoever is born of God doth not commit sin. How does Wesley handle that, knowing full well the Christians stumble?
Right. This is probably the most debated part of the sermon and really important for Methodist self-understanding. Wesley's careful here. He clarifies that when 1 John says, doth not commit sin, he believes it's primarily talking about outward sin.
Outward sin. What does he mean specifically?
He means actual voluntary transgression of God's known law. doing something you know God forbids. It's about deliberate, willful acts.
So not necessarily every mistake or like an impure thought that flashes through your mind.
Less about those and more about conscious choices to disobey. Wesley's assertion, and it's a strong one, is that someone who is truly born of God while they are abiding in faith, love, and prayer.
Okay, that wall seems important.
It's crucial. While they remain in that state of active connection with God, they cannot voluntarily commit that kind of known outward sin.
Cannot. That's strong.
It is. He says, so long as that seed, the divine life which remaineth in him, compels him to refrain. It's like that act of faith, that love for God, acts as a powerful restraint against deliberate rebellion.
Okay, so it's not saying they achieve permanent static perfection. It's about the power available in that state of abiding.
Exactly. The focus is on the power inherent in the new life when it's being actively lived out.
But then, what about the obvious examples? The Bible is full of people considered faithful who sinned badly. David, Peter, even Barnabas had that sharp disagreement.
Wesley tackles this head on. He absolutely acknowledges those biblical accounts. He doesn't ignore them.
So how does he resolve it? Does he say they weren't really born of God at that moment?
Not quite. His explanation hinges on that conditionality again. He quotes another part of 1 John. So long as he that is born of God keepeth himself, the wicked one toucheth him not.
Keepeth himself. So the protection, the inability to sin, is conditional on the believer actively maintaining their state.
That's precisely Wesley's argument. Sin happens, he says, when the believer does not keep themselves, when they let go of that active faith, when love cools, when prayer ceases, when they drift from that abiding state.
He actually lays out steps, doesn't he?
Yeah.
A kind of process of falling away.
Yes, he describes a sort of downward spiral. It's quite insightful, I think.
How does it start?
It starts subtly. The divine seed, that life of God, is still there. But then a temptation arises. And crucially, the Holy Spirit gives a warning, a check, an inner nudge.
But if you ignore it,
if you start to yield even a little, Wesley says the spirit is grieved, faith weakens, love cools down.
then what?
Then comes maybe a sharper reproof from the Spirit, another chance to turn back.
But if you keep turning away,
If you turn from God's voice and listen more to the temptation, the wrong desire grows stronger. Eventually, faith and love can actually vanish for that moment or that period. And then the person is capable of committing the outward sin.
so the inward decline precedes the outward act.
Always, in Wesley's view. He uses David and Bathsheba as a prime example.
Right. How does he apply that process to David?
He suggests David wasn't actively keeping watch. He perhaps let his communion with God slip, maybe neglected prayer or praise. Then came the temptation seeing Bathsheba. The Spirit likely warned him, but he entertained the thought, let lust grow. His spiritual sight dimmed, faith faltered, love for God cooled before he actually committed adultery and murder.
So the fall wasn't sudden, but a gradual turning away inside first.
Yes. And similarly with Peter denying Christ, the temptation was fear. Jesus had warned him, but Peter's faith wavered under pressure. His love didn't hold firm in that moment, and he fell into the outward sin of denial. And Wesley also applies this to Peter's later separation from Gentile believers in Antioch, which Paul confronted. Again, fear leading to a weakening of faith and love, resulting in an outward act inconsistent with the gospel.
Okay, so the big takeaway here for Methodists is that being born of God gives immense power against sin. But it's not automatic immunity. It requires active participation, keeping oneself.
Precisely. It's not that the new birth makes you incapable of sinning, but that while you are actively living out that new birth, trusting, loving, praying, you are kept from deliberate known sin. The failure comes when we neglect that relationship.
That leads naturally into the key implications or learnings from all this, doesn't it?
It does. There are several vital points for faith and practice. First, that point about the internal battle. Inward sin, especially neglecting God, neglecting prayer, that comes before the loss of active faith.
And the lost faith comes before the outward sin.
Exactly. It really emphasizes watching our inner life. Second, Wesley's description of the life of God in the soul. He paints it as this continuous, dynamic thing.
The breathing analogy again.
Yes. God breathes his spirit into us, and we breathe back through love, praise, prayer. It implies a constant awareness, a constant connection perceived by faith.
And our breathing back is essential.
Absolutely essential. That's the third point. Wesley stresses the necessity of our reaction. God's continued work in us depends on our response, our love, our obedience, paying attention to the light he gives.
He warns that God's Spirit won't strive with us forever if we keep ignoring him.
He does. There's a responsibility on our part to cooperate with grace, to nurture that divine life. If we consistently shut him out, that sensitivity, that connection can diminish.
It puts a lot of emphasis on personal responsibility within grace.
It does, which leads to his final strong exhortation.
Be not high-minded, but fear.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a warning against spiritual pride or complacency. Fear sin, he says, more than anything, even death. Maintain this careful, almost jealous watchfulness over your own heart.
Even those strong in faith aren't immune if they let their guard down internally.
No one is. So the answer is constant dependence, constant prayer, always listening for God's voice. That's the path, Wesley argues, to maintain faith, keep love alive, and avoid falling into known sin. It's a call to a vigilant, active faith.
So wrapping this up, if we were to summarize the core message of this foundational sermon for Methodists today, what are the big takeaways?
Well, first, definitely that crucial difference between justification and the new birth, forgiveness, and transformation. They happen together, but they're distinct aspects of God's work.
Okay.
Second, the profound experiential reality of being born of God. It's a real spiritual awakening, opening our senses to God's presence.
Right, the interchange.
Third, understanding what Wesley means by not committing sin, primarily about deliberate outward disobedience, and that this power holds while we actively abide in faith and love. It's conditional on our connection.
Not automatic perfection.
Definitely not. And finally, the sobering reality that, yes, even after being born of God, it's possible to fall away through neglecting that inner life, through turning from God's voice. It highlights the ongoing need for vigilance.
It really underscores that Methodist emphasis on both God's amazing grace that initiates salvation and our ongoing participation in the journey of sanctification, doesn't it?
Perfectly put. It's about both the gift received and the life lived in response to that gift. It's a dynamic relationship, not a static state.
It's a challenging sermon, but also incredibly insightful, I think, for anyone serious about their spiritual journey within the Methodist tradition.
Agreed. It calls us to depth and honesty about our relationship with God.
So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over. How does this Wesleyan understanding of the new birth, this profound change, but also the need for actively keeping oneself, how does that resonate with your own experience? How might it shape your daily practices, your awareness of God's presence, and your approach to temptation? Something to definitely reflect on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.